The scream cut through the Wyoming wilderness like a knife. Eli Walker froze, the rasp of his file going silent in his hand. The sound didn't belong to the mountains, or the pines, or the rushing Wind River. It was human. High, sharp, terrified. For a moment he thought it was another ghost from his past, a memory from the war. But then it came again, weaker this time, almost swallowed by the roar of the swollen river. Eli dropped his tools and ran. His long legs pounded across the rough ground as he scanned the water. The peaceful river he lived beside was gone. In its place was a wild brown beast full of broken branches and racing snowmelt, chewing at the banks like it wanted to eat the whole valley. And then he saw her. A woman, half submerged, clinging to the broken limbs of a fallen cottonwood tree that was being hammered by the current. Her dark hair was plastered to her face. Her dress was torn. One arm was wrapped around a thick branch, while the river tried to rip her away. Her leg looked trapped under the water. Her head dipped, then came back up, barely staying above the rushing foam. Eli didn't think. He didn't plan. He didn't pray. He moved. He kicked off his boots, ripped off his gun belt, and dove into the freezing river. The shock of the cold hit him like a punch. The current yanked at him, pulling him under, slamming debris into his ribs and shoulders. He fought it with every ounce of strength he had left from a life built on survival. When he reached the cottonwood, his fingers burned from the cold. He grabbed a thick limb to steady himself and reached for her arm. "Hold on!" he shouted. She didn't answer. Her eyes were half closed, her face pale. She was slipping away. Her leg was wedged deep between two branches underwater. Eli sucked in a breath and went under. The current shoved him sideways, mud blinding his eyes. He groped with numb fingers and finally freed her foot with a violent pull that nearly tore his shoulder. They resurfaced together. She was limp in his arms. "Stay with me," he growled through clenched teeth. It wasn't a request. It was a command from a soldier who had dragged dying men off battlefields. Fighting the river with her weight dragging him down was like fighting 10 wars at once. But slowly, painfully, step by step, he got them to shore. He collapsed onto the mud beside her, chest heaving, arms shaking. For a long second, she didn't move. Then she coughed. A harsh, painful sound that felt like a miracle. Her eyes opened. Moss green, foggy with fear. "You're safe," Eli said, breathless. She flinched away from his voice, scrambling weakly backward even though she could barely sit. Her dress was ruined, ripped open at the shoulder, clinging to her body in a way that made her wrap her arms around her chest in shame. Where am I?" she whispered. "Wind River country," he said. "My land." "You're not taking me to town," she said suddenly, fear sharpening her voice. "Please, not town." Her terror didn't make sense, but Eli wasn't a man who forced anyone into anything. "I'm not taking you anywhere but somewhere warm," he said simply. "You'll die out here." She tried to stand. Her legs gave out. Eli caught her before she hit the ground. She stiffened in his arms but didn't fight. He carried her all the way to his cabin. Inside, the single room was warm from the fire he never let go out. He set her gently in the chair closest to the hearth and tossed more wood on the flames. "Get those wet clothes off," he said, turning away to give her privacy. His tone wasn't rough, just practical. She froze. Her voice shook. I will not be a bother. As soon as my clothes dry, I'll go." "You ain't going anywhere," he said. "River's too high." The silence was thick, fire crackling, her breath trembling, the storm outside pressing against the walls. Eli made coffee and added a generous splash of whiskey. He set a cup beside her. When he finally looked at her, she was wrapped in his spare wool blanket, her wet dress hanging near the fire. Her cheek was bruised. Her hands trembled around the cup. Her eyes stared into the flames as if something terrible lived inside them. "My name is Eli Walker," he said. She lifted her gaze. For the first time, without fear. "Clara Jensen," she whispered. They drank in silence. Firelight danced across her tired face. When she finally spoke, her voice was thin. "My husband passed, not long ago," she said. "He left debts, bad ones. Men came for the land, said it belonged to them now." She swallowed hard. "I ran. I didn't know the river was so high. My horse threw me. I thought I was going to—" She didn't finish. Eli didn't ask questions. He understood danger. He understood running. The night deepened. She grew quiet, exhausted. Eli laid out his bedroll on the floor. "You take the cot," he said. She hesitated, then nodded. But as the fire dimmed and shadows grew long, her voice came from the darkness. "Mr. Walker?" He didn't turn. "What is it? Quote?" A long pause. Her breathing shaky. "Will you stay if I undress?" The words hit him like a hammer, a raw, broken offer, an echo of fear and shame in a life he didn't yet understand. Eli stared hard at the dying coals. His jaw clenched. His voice came out low, rough, and final. "No one is bothering you here," he said. "Get some sleep." Quote. Behind him, she let out a quiet, choked sob she tried to hide. And Eli Walker lay awake, staring at the fire, knowing the river had washed more than one kind of storm into his life that night. The morning light crept into the cabin slowly, pale and cold. Eli Walker was already up, leaning against the doorframe as he stared at the river. It had calmed some, but not enough for anyone to cross. He didn't hear Clara stir, but he felt when she woke. The shift in her breathing, the soft rustle of the blanket, the quiet dread settling between them like a thick fog. When she finally rose from the cot, she moved stiffly. Her limp was worse. Her eyes were red, not from sleep, but from tears she had tried to hide. "The river is still too high," Eli said without turning around. "I see that." She dressed in silence. Then she stepped outside to work in the small garden, her limp slowing her but not stopping her. Eli told her she didn't have to, but she only said, "It's better than sitting." Days passed like this, slow, quiet, heavy. They shared the cabin, but not their thoughts. They cooked together, ate together, did chores together, but still lived like two strangers who shared the same ghost-filled room. Yet Eli watched her more than he admitted. He saw the scars on her back one afternoon when her dress shifted as she hung laundry outside, thin, pale lines like someone had dragged fire across her skin. He turned away quickly, jaw clenched. He knew what scars like that meant. He'd seen them on soldiers, on prisoners, on the broken. He said nothing. Not yet. Clara, too, watched him in her quiet way. She noticed how he never raised his voice, how he flinched at sudden noises, how he still woke at night, breath fast, eyes sharp, haunted by things the war had carved into him. Two wounded souls circling each other in a tiny wooden cabin. On the third day, Eli walked inside and found Clara sitting at the table, her shoulders shaking. She held a small silver locket in her hands. He recognized grief when he saw it. He made a noise with his boot on purpose so she wouldn't feel ambushed. She straightened quickly, wiping her eyes. "It's nothing," she said. "Just a foolish memory." He didn't push. Her pain was hers to give, not his to take. But later he heard her whisper softly to the locket as she tucked it away. He had his father's eyes. That night things changed. A rider appeared across the valley, Jed, a hand from the ranch Eli worked for. Clara stiffened when she saw him, fear shooting through her like lightning. Jed brought trouble with him. "There's talk in town," he warned. "About her." Eli's jaw tightened. "What talk?" Jed shifted uneasily. "They're saying the widow Jensen ain't no widow, that her husband died in a brawl, and she ran off with money that wasn't hers." Clara flinched like she'd been struck. Jed kept talking, digging the knife deeper. "Amos Jensen, her husband's brother, is tellin' folks she stole from the family. Sheriff seems to believe him. They're fixing to look for her." Jed didn't stay long. When he rode off, he left dust and fear behind him. Inside, Clara stood with her arms wrapped around her body, shaking. "He was right," she whispered. "Amos, he hates me." He always did. He wants what little I saved. He'll lie to get it. Eli leaned against the doorframe, watching her carefully. What aren't you telling me? Her voice cracked open like a wound. My husband, Silas. He wasn't a good man. He drank, he gambled. And when he lost, he took it out on me. She lifted her chin, but her eyes filled. I saved pennies, a few dollars over the years. It was all I had for me, for my baby. She swallowed hard, fighting tears. He was born too early, he didn't live. And Silas, he blamed me. Amos blamed me too. Eli felt something dark coil inside him, a rage so deep it made his hands shake. Clara stared at the floor. I wasn't his legal wife. We were married by a preacher on the trail, but Silas never filed the papers. I have no rights to anything. There it was, the whole truth, shaking in her voice. She expected disgust. Or pity. Instead, Eli spoke with the low rumble of a storm. Promises are just words. Most men never keep them. He finally told her about his brother, Samuel, how the boy had lied to join the army only to die in a camp far from home. How Eli came back from the war to find his fiancée married to another man. We both lost things, he said quietly. Too much. That night, Clara's fever hit, hard. By midnight, she was burning up, tossing in the cot, whispering things that didn't make sense. Eli stayed by her side the whole night, bathing her forehead, cooling her wrists, speaking to her when she cried out. Just before dawn, she grabbed his hand, her eyes glassy. You're the only one, she murmured, the only one who ever touched me without wanting something. The words broke something wide open inside him. He couldn't sleep after that. When dawn came, Clara slept peacefully for the first time. Eli stepped outside to breathe. The river had begun to calm. Soon she would be able to leave, but the thought of her leaving felt like a knife in his ribs. When he turned back toward the cabin, he saw her walking toward him through the cool morning air. Barefoot, wrapped in his old army shirt, the fabric swaying around her knees. Her hair loose and wild, her eyes clear and searching. She stopped in front of him. Eli, she said softly, can I stay a little longer? It wasn't the river asking, it was her heart. He couldn't trust his voice, so he only nodded. And that was the moment their lonely worlds began to turn toward each other. Clara stayed. Days slipped into a quiet rhythm in the little cabin by the Wind River. She cooked, cleaned, tended the garden, and mended Eli's clothes. Eli worked the land, fixed the fences, chopped the wood, and watched her from the corner of his eye more than he meant to. Their lives brushed together in small ways. A shared cup of coffee. A quiet smile. Accidental touches that felt like lightning strikes. But the river wasn't done with them yet. Neither were the ghosts of Clara's past. One hot afternoon, Clara borrowed Eli's horse, Drum. She wanted to feel the wind again, the freedom she lost long before she ever met her cruel husband. Eli watched her ride with a tight feeling in his chest, something like hope wrapped in fear. Then he heard it. A scream, the terrified cry of a horse. He ran, heart slamming, legs burning. He found Drum tangled in brush, and Clara half buried in the loose dirt of a collapsed ravine. She pushed herself up, shaking. "Clara!" he shouted. He slid down the slope, grabbed her shoulders, his hands running over her arms and back, checking desperately for broken bones. I'm all right, she whispered. But Eli wasn't. The fear shook him harder than the river ever had. Without thinking, he pulled her against him, crushing her to his chest. She melted into him, her arms circling his waist, her face buried in his shirt. They stood like that, two battered souls holding each other as if the world was falling apart. When he finally lifted her chin, their faces were inches apart, breaths mixing, hearts pounding. He leaned in, almost kissed her, but then he saw something in her eyes. Not just desire, something deeper, something broken. The woman who had whispered on the first night, "Will you stay if I undress?" He stepped back. The moment shattered. and Clara's heart broke a little. That night, she stood before him in the cabin, her jaw set, her hands trembling. "You saved me," she said. "You care for me." "But you never let me thank you." Eli stared at her, his knife frozen mid-stroke. Then, slowly, painfully, she unbuttoned the old army shirt she wore. "Will you stay this time?" she whispered. The shirt slipped from her shoulders and fell to the floor. She stood before him in her thin shift, the firelight painting her skin gold, her old scars faint and silver. This time it wasn't a trade. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was a woman asking to be seen, wanted, chosen. He crossed the room in 2 long strides. His hands came up to her face, gentle, trembling. "I want you," he said, voice raw, "but not because you owe me anything." Her face crumpled. A tear slid down her cheek, then another, and the truth spilled out, her deepest, darkest secret. Her husband's cruelty, the beatings, the baby she lost because of him, the shame she carried, the small bag of money she saved to escape. She sobbed into Eli's chest, shaking apart in his arms. When she finished, Eli whispered against her hair, "That does not make you less. It makes you braver than any man I ever knew." What happened next wasn't desperate. It wasn't payment. It wasn't pity. It was healing, slow, tender, and filled with a lifetime of pain finally finding a home. But peace never lasts long in the West. 2 days later, a ranch hand arrived with news. Amos Jensen, Clara's cruel brother-in-law, was in town stirring trouble and accusing Clara of theft, so Eli took her to Lander. To clear her name, the sheriff didn't believe her. He called her a liar, a thief, a woman of bad reputation. Eli pulled her out before he put a hole in the lawman. They hid in an abandoned barn. And when Clara finally told Eli everything, the abuse, the lies, the fear, he took her hand, pressed it to his chest, and whispered, "If they want you, Clara, they'll have to take me first." That night, she kissed him with all the pieces of herself she thought were ruined. And he held her like every broken piece was gold. But at dawn, trouble found them. Amos and 2 hired guns burst into the boarding house where they stayed. A fight broke out. Eli killed 1 man, but the second rushed him with a knife. Eli dodged once, twice, but the 3rd strike sank deep into his ribs. He staggered, blood pouring. Clara screamed. In that moment, something wild woke inside her. She grabbed Eli's fallen gun with shaking hands, lifted it, aimed at the man who stabbed him, and fired. The blast echoed through the hallway. The man dropped, howling. Clara fell to her knees beside Eli, cradling his head, sobbing. "Don't leave me, please." "Eli, stay with me." Her tears fell on his face as the judge arrived with the sheriff behind him. Amos was arrested, his hired men too. Eli was carried away, bleeding but alive. Barely. Clara never left his side, not for 1 minute. Through long nights of fever, she whispered him back from the nightmares of war. "You're here, you're safe, you're mine." And he always found her voice. Weeks later, when he could stand again, he looked at her by the window, hair loose, eyes soft, a quiet courage in every breath she took, and said, "I want to wake up beside you every morning, if you'll have a cowboy with a scarred heart." Tears filled her eyes. "Only if you'll have a widow with too many ghosts." He kissed her, long and deep, their promise sealed without fancy words. They married under the cottonwood tree by the Wind River, the same river that nearly took her life. It became the place where she found a new one. Together they built a home on a rise overlooking the valley. A home of warm light, hard work, and the kind of love that grows slow and strong. Like pine roots gripping the mountainside, they healed each other, piece by piece, day by day. And on quiet evenings, when the sun melted into gold behind the peaks, Clara would slip her hand into Eli's as they rode along the river. He'd look at her the way he did that first morning she asked to stay, the way a man looks when he has finally found peace. And she'd whisper, soft as a prayer, Will you stay now? Quote, Eli always smiled, always pulled her close. I'm not going anywhere. The ghost didn't leave them, but they lived with them, together. And for the first time in both their lives, they were truly, finally home.